everyone. How are you? You're good? Good. Thank you so much for coming out. It's the kind of weather that even gave me pause. And I thought, well, I have to go. But it's the kind of rainy day where you really do want to stay home. So we're all really happy that you have made time to come and to share conversation with us. My name is Tricia Rose, and I'm a professor in Africana Studies and the interim director of the Cogut Center for the Humanities, and we are, as in the Center for the Humanities, is sponsoring this event. It's called Poetic Forces, Creative Change in and Beyond the Arab Spring. But before we dive into laying out our questions and conversation, which is what this will be, hopefully a robust conversation, I wanted to let you know of another event this evening, as well as a group of other events that are absolutely sister events, and they dovetail with this quite a bit. It's called Urgent Witness, and they're a group of events, but especially tonight is a poetry reading and conversation with Adonis, the Syrian distinguished poet, and that's at 8 p.m. We're hoping to end our event around 7. We planned it so that there'd be ample time for you all to run over there. It's just a block away at McMillan Hall, 117 McMillan Hall. So you can see me afterwards if you need more information, but we're hoping that you can go to both events. So the inspiration for this event is to really try to think using the concrete example of the Arab Spring and the idea of the globalization of hip-hop as the grounds on which to think about the role of creativity in developing and transforming and contributing to political consciousness. And so that's really what began this conversation. And Elias Muhanna, who is at my far right, and I began talking about this in the fall, and together we brainstormed this event, which is the outcome of those conversations. I want to introduce everyone to you first, and then I'll make a couple of opening general comments. To my immediate right, let me do this in order, hold on. This is not the order it was in, but let's be sensible, is Nancy Khalek, Assistant Professor of Religious Studies at Brown. She's the William A. Dyer Assistant Professor of the Humanities and Religious Studies. Her first book is entitled Damascus After the Muslim Conquest, Text and Image in Early Islam. She's currently teaching a course on Islam and modernity that features the impact of contemporary Islam on media outlets such as Al Jazeera and Black Muslim / hip-hop MCs such as Lupe Fiasco and Mos Def / Yasmin Bey. To her immediate right is Deeb, who is himself an Egyptian hip-hop artist, poet, and ex-financial analyst. So apparently he's got many jobs, many assignments. I'm eager to hear about that one.
You don't.
The emphasis is on the X, is that right? Ex-financial analyst.
Yeah, that's exactly.
He first appeared on the scene in 2005 with the Egyptian hip-hop group Asphalt, and their brand of Arab hip-hop took audiences by surprise with its positive yet sarcastic wordplay. But since 2012, Deeb has focused on his solo career and is widely considered a key hip-hop artist in the Arab Spring and the Tahrir Square protests. California, as in California, but not really. His first solo album is written in colloquial Arabic and addresses social, personal, and cultural concerns of everyday life in Egypt. And his latest effort is called Cold Peace. To his right is Lara Dotson-Renta, Assistant Professor of Modern Languages and Assistant Dean of Career Development at Quinnipiac University. Professor Dotson-Renta does research in post-colonial cultural production, particularly specializing in comparative immigration studies, transnational identities, and Islam in the West. She's the author of the recently published book, Immigration, Popular Culture, and the Rerouting of European Muslim Identity. And in keeping with the absurdly micro life of social media, we actually met on Twitter. And, you know, I started reading her work and thought, hey, we should invite her. So I guess Twitter works. It actually works. And to her right is Elias Muhanna, and he's Assistant Professor of Comparative Literature and Middle Eastern Studies at Brown University, where he researches and teaches courses on classical Arabic literature and Islamic intellectual history. And in addition to his academic scholarship, Muhanna publishes a respected blog, Kifa Nebki, about Lebanese politics and culture, but he also comments on contemporary cultural and political affairs in the Middle East for many general interest publications, including the New York Times, Al Jazeera, BBC, World Service, among others. So if you would just join me first in welcoming our fabulous panelists. I wanted to just sort of lay out a couple of questions and thoughts, and then we're hoping we would show a clip of some work of Deeb's and then put that in context, and then go around and have really a conversation. I just thought it would be a crime to have presentations in the formal sense when we're talking about creativity. It just seemed just a little bit too rigid. So we're gonna do an academic version of freestyling in here. Well, we're just hoping it's not as horrible as that sounds, an academic version of freestyling. If it gets really bad, we'll just pass Deeb the mic and get quiet, okay? Before we assume our failure, let me lay out a few questions and thoughts to everyone here, just as an organizing set of ideas. One of the most fascinating things about the Arab Spring, from my vantage point as a person who has studied a lot of hip-hop in the US and African-American culture, was to learn the pivotal role that it played, indigenous hip-hop, not American hip-hop, played in the Arab Spring, both before, during, and after. And there's certainly many examples of these types of circulations and exchanges, but it was profoundly surprising to me at that time, partly because so much of US hip-hop seems to be in the mainstream, separate from that kind of political consciousness. So it was a very exciting possibility, but it raises lots of interesting questions about what it means to participate in globally circulating cultural forms, but to engage them in local ways that are rich enough to have the kind of impact that it had on the ground. So some of the questions that we're interested in thinking about is the ways in which this kind of creativity, both in hip-hop and maybe poetry in general, fuels the collective desires and consciousnesses of this generation and perhaps the next generation. We want to think across various time periods. And what is the role of global hip-hop in creative change? Is it about its visibility? Is it that it's a modern Western formation? Or is it that it in fact has some sort of intrinsic qualities in terms of its formal presentation that make it such a lively possibility? What is it about the role, say, of African American, or in the US context, Black Muslims, who may have played a kind of symbolic role in making links that went beyond just hip-hop as a commercial form, but in fact connected on other potentially religious grounds? And then, of course, there are the downsides of certain genres and what opportunities they might not allow us to see. But I mean, Deeb has been a remarkable exception to these downsides that we'll get to a little bit later. And so I want us to begin, if we could, with his video. Maybe, Elias, if you could just introduce it, that would be great.
Or maybe you could introduce it.
Well, I meant as you were going to play it, but yes, as Deeb, if you'd like to.
I mean, this video we shot 2 weeks before the revolution, Jan 25, and the song was actually released before the revolution, but when we shot the video, my friend, who was actually half American, half Egyptian, told me, listen, I'm feeling this song, let's do a video for this song. And we did a video, and then the revolution happened. And he told me, listen, I think this is the best time to release it. At the beginning, I was like, no, I don't know about that. I don't want to commercialize or try use the revolution to promote myself. But then I realized that when you make music, you don't, it starts with you, but you don't do it for yourself. You do it for the people. And it was released at a time where people needed that motivation. So music, created that sort of motivation for the people to go down to the square to protest. As you can see, you're going to see in the video, it has a lot of faces from, people on the streets, random people that we don't even know. So it was like a call or a rally for, listen, let's go down and change, do something. Masrah Deeb.
واخد المزيكا لا هواية لحد ما اكتشفت الموهبة جوايا. كلامي مراية لأحداث عشتها، بدأت على قدي وقتها وانا بعلى في المستوى. فن التطبيق عايز وقت، اسلوبي استوى، همه والضغط والفقر شعبي عايز هوا. كله في الهوا سوا بس الهوا مش هوانا، لو حليم كان عايش مش هيكون زيرو تاني. فتح عينك اوعى تغمضها، ولا انت فالح تتفرج على فيلم عرض اول مرة. انا مش ديكتاتور، ديب دكتور في قسم البيت، تخصص فولكلور شيك ديكور. مع المسرحية الكوميدية زكية زكريا والعصابة المفترية، سياسية ومرسية أغنية عصرية زي منير مصرية مية مية. وقتي بضحي شعبي بصحي، ميكروفون صاحبي بيقدر صراحتي، معاه بكون على راحتي. الحياة نكتة أهلا بيك في مسرحتي. وقتي بضحي شعبي بصحي، ميكروفون صاحبي بيقدر صراحتي، معاه بكون على راحتي. الحياة نكتة أهلا بيك في مسرحتي. ناس جميل الكلام يطلع من الضلمة للنور، أيام معرفش أنام أفكار جوه دماغي تدور. هتنط فوق السور أسأل نفسي ارهق ذهني خلى دماغي تفور زي البيبسي. نفسي في إيه؟ هقولك كمان يلا اسمي إيه؟ ديب نقولها كمان مرة. في ناس زي مدحت شلبي من بره بره، هلا هلا ومن جوه يلا والله. رسالتي اللي بفصلها هوصلها لناس طلب نظرها مستنية فرحة لحظة. في ناس حافظة مش فاهمة، ناس رافضة ومعارضة من غير لازمة، ناس حاسين بالأزمة تعبانين حابسين دم الملايين زي التعابين. مستعد أغني مع شعبنا عبد الرحيم، أعمل أغنية اسمها أنا بكره الظالمين. وقتي بضحي شعبي بصحي، ميكروفون صاحبي بيقدر صراحتي، معاه بكون على راحتي. الحياة نكتة أهلا بيك في مسرحتي. وقتي بضحي شعبي بصحي، ميكروفون صاحبي بيقدر صراحتي، معاه بكون على راحتي. الحياة نكتة أهلا بيك في مسرحتي. الإيقاع ماشي بطيء زي البطيء، المزيكا زي مطافي بتطفي حريق. وصلي طريق بعيد عن الماضي وغريب، عالم غريب أكنك رائد فضائي في المريخ. نظام سد واستريح، بس لو سدوا باب الريح انت هتشم النسيم. هكلم مين واقول لمين لما نص شعبي في شم النسيم بيشم النسيم زي حكيم. افرض مثلا يعني في واحد وعدني بعدين خدعني، ماذا تعني؟ اللي لسعني مفيش حاجة جاية هتوجعني. جالي تنبؤ معوي مش شعبي اللي معني، دعمي مشاعري بيشيل من متاعبي. انزل على ركبي وكعبي واحمد الوهابي اللي وهبني بأدبي وعجبي. وقتي بضحي شعبي بصحي، ميكروفون صاحبي بيقدر صراحتي، معاه بكون على راحتي. الحياة نكتة أهلا بيك في مسرحتي. وقتي بضحي شعبي بصحي، ميكروفون صاحبي بيقدر صراحتي، معاه بكون على راحتي. الحياة نكتة أهلا بيك في مسرحتي. أهلا بيكم مسرحيتي، مسرحية اجتماعية كوميدية إيجابية.
What did you perform? Give us some background for everyone here. Did you perform this? What was the response? How did this get received, etc.?
I mean, before performing in Tahrir Square, I was actually protesting physically. Going there, you know, every day with the people just to protest. But then, obviously, I wanted to sing too. I mean, this was a chance to reach millions. You know, people who've never heard of hip hop before, and especially when you're going through revolution, this is the time to, you know, shock the people in a way, to people who've never been introduced to hip hop. So I think it was perfect to like, you know, to rap my songs in the middle of the square to millions of protesters. Something I've never even like thought of, you know, never imagined to do that. So it's a privilege to be performing in Tahrir Square. I performed more than once. I performed this song, and actually the audience were like, you know, coming back with the lyrics and shouting out the lyrics. It was amazing. It was an amazing feeling. I never thought when I was writing this song that I would be performing it, you know, at such a venue with like the energy and the adrenaline. So it felt really special. I remember one time actually performing there. One of the, you know, an extremist, because you know in Egypt we're a lot of mixture. We have, you know, we're some seculars, liberals. We have conservatives or Islamists, we call them. one guy wanted to stop me from performing. He saw that me performing was a bad thing. But then one of the protesters stopped him from coming up and stopping me from stage. So this is very important how music can affect people and affect the average person on the streets. For him to take action against basically extremism, against people who have a problem with arts, have a problem with freedom of expression. So this is another advantage of how music can change that, can do that.
Yeah. And one other question, and then I want to open it up. So what was the role of hip hop prior to this? In other words, you say there wasn't much access to it. I know Palestinians, Moroccans have a pretty robust hip hop scene, but in the context of Egypt, what was young people's access in particular, if at all, and after?
When we performed before the revolution, we addressed a certain class, whether it be middle to lower, because those were the people that really had problems. And those were the majority in Egypt. So we had to address those type of people, those type of class in our society, and it was mainly young people that came to our shows. It was very interesting, like 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 20-year-olds, because the teen have like a lot of charge of them, and they compare themselves to other countries and they compare themselves with other societies. And in Egypt, we have a lot of youth, 50% youth. So those were the main audiences that used to come. Now, after the revolution, it's interesting to see that there's a more diverse audience coming to our shows. It's all classes now. It's, whether it be a rich class, middle class, lower class. So it's important how music is, getting rid of the barriers in a way, and you have a diverse audience. We never used to see that before. Because of the situation, obviously, Right.
Okay, Elias, did you want to comment on that?
Well, just a couple of things I've noticed from my perspective of, thinking about popular cultural production in the context of the Arab Spring. One of the things that I've noticed is the decision to use colloquial dialects in different different contexts. This is really the stuff that takes off, right? And we see it time and time again, not only in the context of the Arab Spring, but if you go back, 40 years in the 70s, and for example in Morocco, where you really see that the modern Moroccan popular song take off when people start singing in Moroccan colloquial. And in the current context, we also see it, whether it's in Morocco or Tunisia or in Egypt or in Palestine or in Lebanon. The music that seems to really resonate with people is the stuff that is not only in the colloquial, but really draws on the store of proverbs that are local, that make sense, that have a kind of local poetry to them. And your lyrics are no exception to that. What I find interesting is that in the, when we think about the ideas that are floating in the Arab Spring, you often encounter the idea that this is kind of like the Arab world is rising, this is an Arab Spring. But at the same time, the concerns are intensely local, just like the lyrics are. If I had some clips lined up right now of Moroccan rappers without subtitles, I think that many Arabs in this audience would have a hard time understanding maybe even the language, let alone the references. Egyptian dialect is it's easier for most people to understand because of Egypt's cultural production, Egyptian cinema, and so on. But even there's a lot where I'm listening to your lyrics and I'm thinking, hold on a second, what is that reference there? What's he talking about there? And then to take the level of fragmentation even further, in one of your songs, there's the song, it's translated in the handout, it's called Migrating Birds. At one point you say, something along the lines of, I don't believe in this proverb of, the birds of a feather flock together. That we're not birds of a feather, we're ducks and swans and pigeons and we're all kinds of different things. This is in Egypt, right, in one country. So there's this reflection on the idea that even in one country, we can't talk of like a single corporatist identity. We have to talk about, conflicting ideologies. So from your perspective as an artist, do you see that as a problem, or do you see that as something that you embrace, or what's your take on it?
It's something that I embrace because this is what hip hop's all about. It's like representing your, you know, your heritage, representing where you're coming from. You know, I can't be talking about global issues, obviously, but I feel like there's certain issues that I have to tackle first before I start addressing, you know, the global issues. Especially, you know, with the situation of Egypt, it's you know, we're building a new nation, so it makes sense for me to talk about the local things first before addressing the global issues. And you know, pop culture has always been there in hip hop. You know, you always listen to certain references, certain names. You know, they talk about certain, you know, movies, or you know, it's hip hop. It's everyday life. I mean, with the language, you know, yeah, I'm blessed to be to have a language that's very easily understood by all Arabs. You're saying Moroccan can be a bit difficult to understand. Yeah, I have some difficulty understanding Moroccan, honestly. But Egyptian Arabic is more like slang Arabic, you know. Or if you want to understand it, it's like Brazilian Portuguese. You know what I mean? It's like, it's from the streets. It's affected by a lot of cultures. And if you know a little bit about Egyptian history, we have a lot of, you know, backgrounds or different histories. Like we have Africans, we have you know, Romans, we have Greeks, we have Arabs. So it's a, you know, a mixture, a melting pot, kind of like what you have in the U.S. in a way, different backgrounds, different cultures. So yeah.
You know, it's an interesting tension though, right? Because on the one hand, the local creates this intimacy and very specific set of contexts. But at the same time, we're talking about the notion of a kind of global context, because why would everyone be rapping, right? So there's an interesting tension. I'm wondering if Lara or Nancy, maybe we'll see which, maybe both of you can comment on this, how this transnational global circulation happens at the same time, right? As there's this sort of distinctive local set of traditions going on.
I agree with you, and you know, it's I mean, in order to like talk about global issues, yes, there are certain, like, you know, themes that we can be talking about, like corruption. Everyone knows what corruption is about, right? Racism, you know, police brutality. That's all over the world. That's something that everyone can relate to. So when I mention it in the songs, you know, people can pick up on it. They can like, yeah, we have that type of those type of themes in our society too.
Something that I found really interesting is this idea of reclaiming the importance and the value of the local through the lens of the global, right? So going transnational, going global, making these things that are going to be seen and diffused in all of these international ways, precisely to raise the point that what is local, you know, has as much value, if not more, to those listening and to those producing these pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I come into this from the perspective of modern languages and literature, but as a Latin American, specifically someone from the Caribbean, and what drew me to all of this work being produced in North Africa and the Middle East was a point of recognition. And I'm not an Arab, I'm not a Copt, I'm not a Muslim, I'm not any of these things, but there was a fundamental point of recognition in the work being produced, right? So in this video that you showed, you focused on faces of people in the streets, right? So this idea of a people beyond the state. You know, it was a critique of the state, it was very political, but the essence of what was important and what gave it strength and what gave it power was a people detached from any state apparatus, right? And I think when you circulate that, it really does have that mobilizing power that you said.
You personalize it, and I think music is a very personal experience. It's a personal journey, you know. And then when I make my music, that's how I start. I start thinking about what I want to say, not what my friend wants to say, or what, you know, a certain group in society wants to say. It's what I want to say. When I was making these songs, it came out of the love for my country. It came out of, you know, disappointment of why Egypt was the way it was before the revolution. Why weren't people talking about corruption? Why weren't people reacting to police brutality? In a way, it became very normal for them to see that every day in their life. And because I had the privilege to live abroad and come back, I had that bird's eye view, similar to, you know, when you talked about the song Immigrating Birds, I was touching on that too. I think when you travel, you have you know, a bird's eye view on certain problems. So when you go back, you land at these problems and you tackle them. Different than when someone lives in, you know, his country for the rest of his life and he doesn't know what's better, or he doesn't know that he deserves a better, you know, position in society.
Yeah. You know, I wanted to pick up on this issue of the contradictions a little bit, and the way in which creativity may in fact inspire more subtle political formations, right? So that things are contradictory. But even to that point, the way in which hip hop depends on metaphor so profoundly as a way of describing things. And I'm wondering, in some interview, I read many, with you, you talked about how important it was to use metaphors and indirection because there were certain things you could not say. So can you talk a little bit about that and perhaps put it in context for us? Artistic and political context, I guess, to be specific.
In the artistic sense, you know, metaphors are a big part of hip hop. We always like to compare something like something else, so something like a comparison that everyone else would relate to, you know, they would understand. And Arabs love metaphors. We love that. We love poetry. So it was very normal for me to, you know, pursue this type of music because all the criteria fits, right? Poetry, imagery, metaphors, rhymes, right? Freestyle battles. Believe it or not, Arabs used to freestyle battle way before even the rise of Islam, like 1,400 years ago. They basically, like, you know, stand in front of each other and throw ciphers, and the person with more intelligence would win, you know, the cipher. And that's exactly what a freestyle cipher is today, in today's terms. So it's very interesting, you know, the similarities, you know, between the hip hop culture and the Arab culture.
I wanted to just pick up again on this before we beat it to death, the issue of the local. I was interested in, we're going to show a clip of another song that was written, I guess, a year after.
It was 6 months through.
Okay, so I'll be curious to hear you talk about what changed, if anything, in your mind about what was happening in Egypt. And I'm interested in you know, this idea of, like, when you're looking at a society. I remember when all this was happening, being on Facebook or on Twitter, and hearing people say things, especially in those really heady moments of the revolution, whether it was in Tunis or in Egypt, people saying, the people have stood up, and this is the real evidence that these people are a nation. Okay, so Tunisia, nation. Egypt, nation. And wherever it didn't happen, wherever it wasn't, for some reason people didn't stand up, or if they tried to and it didn't work, and there was division, people would say, this is obviously, they didn't pass the litmus test, they're not a nation. Which is very problematic, clearly. But what we're seeing now in Egypt is kind of along the lines of your lyrics, that we were seeing that there are, in fact, lots of divisions, you know, and people, and Egyptians are talking about, well, we have liberals and we have seculars and we have, you know, ikhwanjis and we have niswanjis, as you say in your song. So I'm curious about, you don't have to address this now, maybe after we show the clip, but I'm curious about how you understand, because you said earlier we're building a new nation. Do you see that as problematic, that, or how do you deal with this shift from we're all, you know, standing up to face oppression, to how the hell do we live with each other? How the hell do we reconcile these social problems and differences in mentality? And are we, in fact, the same people? Or should we play the clip?
Yeah,
and then,
that sounds like a good idea.
All right.
Yeah.
You're going to play Ma'oud, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Ma'oud is, yeah, a year and a half after the revolution.
Okay.
موعود
I was more angry in the song because nothing changed.
موعود معايا بالعذاب موعود يا قلبي نداء لكل اخواني لبناني اسوانجي يا ابوك قاضي خليني اقول اللي في بالي بلاش نتكلم في الماضي راح كله براح دخلوا علينا مصطلحات غريبه زي حكومه التكنوقراط فساكن مالي البلد ريحته فايحه زي تحت الشاط الظباط ماشيين بالزبالة زي الروبوتات بلغة الضرب عبر عن حالة اضطراب زمان عملت اضراب كنت بتضرب بالكونترات هم دول اللي احنا بنسميهم فروض النظام. المصري بيضرب فوق بانتظام يسكت تمام بتتصدروا في بلافها لسه بتصدروا الخزنة لسه بيحصل في غزة بص بيحصل ببلدنا تحرش كل يوم فاتحين تتشطروا بعزة طلعنا احنا الأغلبية وانتوا بتخلوا المدرسة قبل المواقع الإباحية هاتوا الأصابع الخفية سألوني الإنسانية قلت له إنسانية موعود والحياة مش لونها قبلي مفيش ورود تقف جنبي يا تموت اكتب على صوت لا الحب ورود دي وقت الوصول لا الحب ورود دي وقت الوصول موعود والحياة مش لونها قبلي مفيش ورود تقف جنبي يا تموت اكتب على صوت لا الحب ورود دي وقت الوصول يا سيدي مش هاوي مزيكاتي زي سيدي مكاوي سيدي بتقال يا مقال وانت مش داري خفة الداري اتاري ضميرك مخروم ونص زي الكباري بيتلاعب بينا زي الأتاري لساني حصاني صوته صاني عشت ربع قرني هغني لليوم من ربنا يرد قلبي عايز ارد ارضي سنة ونص عم بتاع التلحين بس شعبي مش مرضي وحياة سيدي مرسي والعباس ما تخش صور على الاحداث كله كان شغال في نفس الجهاز انفلت قال لي تقليد محاكمات كلامنا قلت الواحد امي تنتهي من زمان يظهر وبان عليك الاخوان عليك الاعلام اللي لسه ما اتغيرش من ايام ماما سوزان مات الكلام وانا بتفرج على نواب البرلمان دافنين راسي من تحت الارض زي النعام موعود والحياه مش لونها قبلي مفيش ورود تقف جنبي يا تموت اكتب على صوت لا الحب ورود دي وقت الوصول لا الحب ورود دي وقت الوصول موعود والحياه مش لونها قبلي مفيش ورود تقف جنبي يا تموت اكتب على صوت لا الحب ورود دي وقت الوصول لا الحب ورود دي وقت الوصول
we can pick up on this question of the notion of the nation and the notion of a we, but I want to sort of push a little further as we get warmed up here around some other ways in which the nation as an idea carries with it potentially oppressive ideas, not just between groups of people, but for example, gender, which hip hop has its own legacy with, which you and I have talked about. Mm-hmm. But the way in which a certain kind of masculinity is stands in for the nation. So I'm wondering if you can speak to both, you know, the nation question in general and the we and the multiplicities getting along, but also the politics of how one would go about that.
I think pre-revolution, we all thought, you know, very similar. Everyone had, you know, a certain idea on how they should live their life because we were controlled by a dictatorship. And when you live in a dictatorship, you don't have the freedom to be yourself. You don't have the freedom to, you know, basically promote who you are because then, you know, you start being attacked by the system. So after the revolution, especially those 18 days in the square, you really felt, you know, the unity between the people. You were asking me about, you know, the different sects, liberals, conservatives, or Islamists, if you want to say that. Yeah, everyone was united in the square. Everyone was calling for the same thing, you know, freedom, social justice, and, you know, basically against corruption. But once we started playing politics, you know, things started being different because the people in the square realized that, no, I'm different than this guy next to me because, you know, I see myself, you know, I don't know, as a different person, different character, different background. So that's what the Egyptians weren't used to. They weren't used to having different parties, political parties on the scene because they never actually voted before. Before the revolution, no one used to vote. You know, no one really cared about politics. But after the revolution, yeah, we started seeing a lot of parties coming up on the scene, and this is when the division started to happen. Yeah. You know, even I remember the first elections that we had. You know, people were starting to look at people differently. Like, oh, you're voting for these guys. You know, oh, you're voting for the liberals or the conservatives. So I think you guys are used to that. You know, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you have nothing against each other. Okay. Everyone has their own right.
I wouldn't go that far.
Maybe not. Maybe not, right? I mean, it's not gonna be violent or it's not gonna be like aggressive or, you know, you have to like agree to
Well,
disagree in a way.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly I wouldn't argue for, you know, a dictatorship or totalitarian regime, but I think that there is a little bit of a fiction that the U.S. also promulgates, that there isn't a certain level of violence going on, oppressive violence under the rubric of a democratic nation state, and that's part of what's underneath my question, which isn't just for you, it's for everyone, which is, you know, thinking about, you know, if artistic expression is partly about speaking about where people are, what happens when a challenge is required that isn't where people are, right? So I mean, this seems to me to be very important around gender, right? Just to go back to that point. And hip hop has not successfully, to my mind, dealt with this problem, whereby on the one hand, it's very good at narrating oppression and marginality, but it is not so good at making space for women's experiences on equal footing as the spokespeople for those voices. Now, I can't speak to Egyptian hip hop, as I've begged off as an expert in that regard, without a doubt. So I guess my question is this a part of Egyptian hip hop or Arab hip hop in general? And if it is that sort of a hip hop inspired problem or a Middle Eastern inspired problem? What are the relationships between those two? Maybe Lara, since we haven't heard you in a minute, and then we'll just go around and see what people think.
Well, what I thought about immediately after you said that, well, there have been a few songs that have come out basically in support and in honor of the women who participated in the uprising. So you mentioned, there's actually another song, Sisters, by Arabian Nights, that they did in conjunction with, I believe, Issam Bashiri of Outlandish, again, honoring women who participated. But there's been a bit of a controversy going on recently with the Palestinian group Deeb. They released a song not too long ago, and it sort of goes, it's a beautiful music video, and it goes backwards from the moment of when this woman is killed in an honor killing to, sort of earlier in her life and her hopes and what her dreams were and whatnot. And it directly takes on the issue of patriarchy from within, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, this is our problem and we're talking about it. And I saw it and was just so excited. Like, this is a wonderful piece, both anywhere, it doesn't matter where you are, and men need to be a part of this conversation and all these things. And then I was sort of immediately surprised at the backlash that it created from a lot of female academics about this. Like, well, we should be talking about the occupation. That's our big problem. Why are you making this, video talking about things that propagate this image of Arab men and whatnot? And so that was an immediate introduction to that tension, right? Mm-hmm. So are we talking about the state and issues of politics? And at what point does, internal violence, things that are maybe regional, local, cultural, is there a point at which you can and cannot talk about them together? And so that's an ongoing thing that I've been doing a lot of reading and digging into, because perhaps my perspective from where I sit geographically, culturally, in terms of my work, I was not expecting that reaction from when it came out, from the people who sort of critiqued it first.
We expected that, once we've had a revolution, it's that we're set for some progress, some cultural development, identity development, and accepting of one another. But unfortunately, the Muslim Brotherhood haven't been capitalizing on that. They've been capitalizing on poverty rates and illiteracy rates. We have a lot of illiteracy rates, 50% illiteracy rates in Egypt. So you can imagine how easy it is for anyone in control to control the people, because they don't know better. They don't read books. That's why it was very easy for them to play around with them. But right now, it's not difficult for an average person on the streets to realize that the people in control are liars, and they're they don't have a plan. They don't have any social agenda or economic agenda. They're just using religion to get votes, and they're not even applying religion. If you want to think about it, like they're very secular actually in the way they're doing things, very secular in the way they're doing politics, but they're just using tag to get the people's votes. Now, what should we do? I don't know. I think 4 more years of this, get rid of them and vote for a new government. I'm really tired of seeing people going down to the streets and dying. I'm not just the only person. A lot of people have been exhausted because of the revolution. So, this is the democracy that we asked for, right? But at the same time, we have to accept and be responsible for the results, but also hope, that we can correct ourselves in a very quick manner.
Yeah. So, if we can talk a little bit about this experience of both exhaustion and frustration in the context of creativity. So, can you share, and maybe Elias, you can pipe in here in the broader Arab world context as well, or both of you. But I'm wondering if you all could share with us not just hip hop, but the way other youth expressive culture, or maybe other hip hop artists or other creative people in general are responding to this stage. Because a lot of the assumption is that the music and the poetry spoke to an inchoate feeling and put it in words in a moment of sort of not so much anger but frustration and release. But it sounds like there's a different set of needs that might be going on now. And what role are the arts playing, particularly among young people now? And I don't know if you want to start, and maybe we'll come back to Deeb.
Well, I think again we have to go back to the local issue because it's different in different contexts, and I don't honestly know, what to use a word from the financial world, what the market penetration is of hip hop in any of these various contexts, or what any other kind of protest or emancipatory cultural production is in various contexts. I know that, for example, one of the artists who was at BAM last week, whose name is El General, he had this a song that came out around the time of the revolution in Tunisia.
El General?
Yes.
Yeah, Tunisian.
Yes, exactly. And so this song, Rais al-Blad, is that really was everywhere. That on YouTube it has like hundreds of thousands of views, and that is a very angry song that kind of channeled a lot of the frustration and anger there. In other contexts, you don't have the same bubbling up. In Syria, which is a black box in many ways, you don't have, again, people, who have the luxury of going into a square and rapping and you know what I mean? So I think that it really depends on the situation. Yeah.
You want to follow up?
In terms of penetration of the music?
Well, no, I'm thinking, what's really underneath it, so it's like there's three questions below that question. That's actually my question.
Okay.
But I can't help, my field is African American culture and history, so what stuns me is the levels of parallel on a variety of levels, but the role of poetry, the role of music, the role of everyday life, the role of representing collectivity as a means of managing an ongoing level of violence, marginalization, refusal to be incorporated into a body politic, etc. So what interests me here is, the assumption is that black music in the U.S. is most important when it's political, when it's saying fight the power, when it's saying, even money, whatever. You can go back many generations. That's what makes it political. But there's also another argument that what makes it political is it creates a cultural space for maintaining a consciousness and creating a sense of possibility. As you said casually here before we started, right? You can be angry about something without being angry and sort of setting yourself aflame, right? So my question has more to do with, okay, we're not in the square now in this way. You can't wait every 4 years. Look, black people have been waiting every 4 years for a really long time. So you have to have a way to sustain yourself in the meantime. It's not like a 4-year project, okay? So I guess I'm asking you, in what way are you seeing the music and the culture and the emotional wherewithal for both maintaining a political consciousness of protest, but also of sustenance, of maintenance, and what is the role of either hip hop or young artists around that?
We can't be talking about politics all the time. You can't do that as an artist, right? Because that's for the news. That's for news reporters and anchors to tell you, the details of this day or that what happened today or the weather. Even that's not my job. The reason why I'm talking about politics in my music is because we're living politics every day. We're seeing, things unravel and new incidents happening, and I have to talk about that. I can't turn a blind eye again on it, But at the same time, just similar to what you're saying, you have to be talking about other issues, you know, social issues, issues like sexual harassment, because it's a big problem in my country too. I have to talk about it. And I've talked about it very briefly in the last song. I mentioned it. Those are the kind of issues that we have to be tackling, you know, obviously, while waiting for in the next upcoming 4 years, because those are the type of issues that are gonna, like, you know, strengthen the average person on the streets, you know, give him a sense of representation. For the women, for example, it'll, you know, give them confidence that someone else is talking about their problems. So, you know, they feel like they're represented, they'll still follow what's happening in the country. They'll go down and vote. You know, they won't have other ideas like, you know, I can't have this, I want to leave. So you have to represent everyone, and you have to talk about many issues, not just politics. Culture issues, identity issues. I touch on a lot of identity issues because I'm an expat who moved back, so that comes in my music. It comes a lot in my music, you know, finding who I am, talking about my history, even talking about certain things in history that people who lived in Egypt through all their lives don't even know about. So that's the education part. You need to educate them on many levels other than the political level. Coming up on the scene, a lot of street art, amazing street art. One of the stencils is, if I see you sexually harassing a girl, I'll cut your hand. Literally, I'll cut your hand, you know, as explicit as it may sound. But for a sexual harasser, when he reads that on the streets, when he sees that stencil, he'll think twice before, you know, before he even thinks about doing something, you know, to a girl. So those are the kind of initiatives that are coming up on the scene, and this is the perfect time to be discussing these issues because we're in a stage of building our nation again, you know.
Lara, I wonder if you could speak to the European Muslim immigrant context in relationship both to the Arab Spring but even to hip-hop in terms of a diasporic context, because a lot of this, I mean, again, there's local, expat, national, international, and I'm wondering if you could put us in context of diaspora.
Well, the diaspora has participated, I think, in ways that are sort of unprecedented culturally and politically in all of these movements. So you have, you know, songs that were created collaboratively across continents. It's like, well, you write this piece, I'll do this piece. Someone will mix it all together and we'll put it on YouTube, right? And so other than, okay, well, the lyrical aspect of this is fascinating. Everyone's coming from a different national history, perhaps. It all started, it all became really prominent in support of Egypt because Egypt has such a prominent voice in terms of media and cultural production. But what I came to find out, both through, you know, research and through trying to put together things like colloquia on what was taking place was, you know, the personal cost of these people, even if they lived outside of the places in which they were writing about. It still is such a climate of fear, you know. So there I am trying to put together a panel on something, and I'm using Tor, and I'm using fake names, and I'm withholding, you know, it's like my family's still there, you can't say this. Please don't advertise this, please put it in a different, and I'm sitting there like panicking because I'm like, oh my God, if I say the wrong thing or release the wrong piece of information, am I responsible for someone's relative being kidnapped or something like that, right? So it was a very quick introduction into the culture of fear that pervades even for those who live on the outside, right? Your ties that bind become you know, a noose around your neck if you say the wrong thing, irrespective of where you are. So I started seeing that this idea of profiling a people or, you know, a commonality or a common hope across barriers, across nations, across languages became something that superseded that omnipresent image of the state, right? So what did a lot of these dictators have in common was their image and likeness everywhere. Yeah. It's the only thing that you see. It's the only image of reality that you have. It's the lens, it's your filter. And so you create these alternate voices in a way that you can't stop it, right? Well, if you block it here, we're going to show it here. If you block it here, we're going to, you know, replicate it, create a mirror, and then we're going to show it in this other country, right? So there was no way around it, and the diaspora had access in that way. And, you know, technical capabilities in that way that they could provide that people who were sort of in the situation at that moment could not, right? So it became this amazing collaborative effort. You know, I heard even of artists who were helping record a track and also smuggling SIM cards in, to help people out. And it's like, well, okay, what do you need to protest? Okay, fine, I know someone who lives there, I'll send, And so it really became a collaborative effort in a way that was immensely interesting to me. Yeah. And it involved, as you said, American Muslims from, the neighborhoods in Philadelphia, New York, and the United States that were converts, but that felt that they could really align themselves with what was taking place. And, as someone residing in the United States who kind of came to hip hop in that context, growing up, I found that kind of collaboration from people who did not speak Arabic, who were not Arab, who had, never been to the Middle East. That kind of commitment was, truly something to dig into for me.
So let me ask one more question before we open up the floor for questions and comments. And I want to, I'm thrilled by all of not only the reality, but the potential for new technologies, for shared cultural languages, for surprising sort of imagined diasporas, right, that people create. And that's all wonderful, but there's also a flip side that I want us to spend a little time on before we move ourselves to happy land, which is that for every one of these moments, there's also the possibility that all of those energies can be pressed into either a totalitarian service or political service in problematic ways in the U.S. or corporate service, that it can become something quite different. So I guess what I'm interested in, I would like you to start, just because we haven't heard from you, and I know we've talked about this. What are the ways that we can keep our eye on those potentials and not get ourselves caught up in a kind of romance that by definition, hip hop or any art form is in and of itself intrinsically a progressive or politically resistant form? I mean, you can't pay close attention to American hip hop today and not have a question about that, right? So in fact, Black Muslim MCs are not at the center of contemporary American mainstream hip hop, and there's no real public radical mainstream at all. I mean, you have people doing amazing things, but they're not part of what you'd call the sort of big players. And I guess what I'm wondering is this if we were to say is this a historical trajectory? Is it an outcome we should worry about in the context of the Middle East? Or is it just an American problem? Highly unlikely, but I guess I'm wondering, how do we respond to that as opposed to just imagining that these spaces will continue? So, and after we answer that, then those of you who might want to join in will come to the audience. Yeah.
I don't know that I have a clear answer to that, but I think one of the things that I've been struck by that is similar across different examples of cultural production in this context is the reclaiming of agency by different people who are producing because of the possibilities of technology. So as great as your music is, if you didn't have access to the ability to basically record and mix and everything on a laptop and then disseminate it through YouTube, we would be looking at a totally different picture. And by the same token, when you look at the Syrian context, somebody described the introduction of the camera phone into all of these conflict zones, especially in Syria, as akin to the introduction of the 6-shooter in the Wild West, as basically the great equalizer. Because you have basically a tank, an army tank coming down a street, and you have a kid with a camera phone, a Nokia phone, holds it up like this and hits record. And within 3 hours has that clip on the internet, on Twitter. So it's a totally different, it's a cliche to say it, but it's a totally different world we're living in. What we find, the problem, this kind of speaks to your point, I think, is that you then have millions of narratives all of a sudden. You have millions of these videos circulating, and it becomes difficult to make sense of what is what and how it's being leveraged to serve a certain kind of ideology or a certain interest or so on. But then I think there's also a reason for optimism, a silver lining. In the case that Lara mentioned, that Palestinian group Dem, they released this video about honor killings. There is a reaction from the American Academy against it, from a couple of academics who say, we really love your music, but we feel like you're being seduced by the honor crime, and you should have taken this opportunity to complicate people's understanding of life under occupation and so on. But Dem responded, which again is so I don't know that we would have seen that in the past, where you had these guys living in Palestine, and they hear about the Academy's problem with their music, and they hear about it because of this global networked world, and they decide, hey, we can actually respond to this, and they did. And the reaction was, I found on Jadaliya, was actually overwhelmingly on the side of this Palestinian group, who said, hold on a second. Our audience is not the ivory tower. We're living here. We are rapping in Arabic. We're talking about our problems. So who are you to come tell us about what we can and can't talk about? You know, so for every instance of something negative about, you know, this networked world that we're living in, I think there's also something to be hopeful about.
Yeah. Okay.
Along the lines of what he said, and I think something that we've observed here a lot is protest becoming performance. So you tape it, and you put it in part of the music videos that you're using, right, when you're making a political point. So there's, you know, protest footage of things happening in Damascus and Hama, in Daraa, and different places. And so that's got its positive point of really bringing home what's happening. And it's got its kind of scary flip side of what happens when a protest where people are dying becomes a performance space, becomes a performance piece, something that you're looking at in terms of entertainment. Does that video game phenomenon go in where you're not making the connect that people are in real danger here? Or does it, you know, help bring home the point, or a little bit of both? And again, there's so many narratives that it becomes difficult to suss out where things are coming from, what they're being used for, who did what. And so that whole idea of a protest becoming a performance event and then being propagated over and over again on the internet in so many different ways is both this space of immense possibility and a little frightening when you know the stakes and what's taking place.
Yeah.
I think your points are very valid about you know, whether Arab hip hop is going to fall into the same, I like to call them mistakes of, you know, American hip hop, by becoming commercial, by becoming you know, very distant from reality. And that's corporate. That's the corporate world. You know, whenever they see something that's so powerful like music, they'll try to, you know, taint it. They'll try to water it down. Just like movies too. I think not just music, movies, music, even books. You know, those are very powerful tools that can affect human thinking. So the corporate world will always try to, you know, water it down and make money out of it. Now, the situation with Egypt is, it's very good that we have a lot of conscious hip hop coming up on the scene, and very few commercial music coming out. But I predict in a couple of years we'll start having, you know, commercial Arab hip hop. I mean, I'm seeing signs already. I'm seeing signs already of people selling out, you know. So it's interesting. But then, since we have a big base, conscious hip hop in the Arab world is very big. It's going to be very difficult for these commercial acts to, you know, appeal to the audience or even get street cred. You know, it's meaningless now for them to be talking about, you know, poppy stuff and, you know, parties and stuff when we have a song by hip hop artists that talk about, you know, real issues. So yeah, we're going through it. And the thing is, like, I want the mainstream to be the conscience. You know, there's nothing wrong with the word mainstream. Mainstream is basically everyone being, you know, knowing about it, or that this type of music is accessible to the masses. And we have a chance to make, you know, hip hop music, conscious hip hop music, accessible to the masses. You know, there's nothing wrong with Arab hip hop going mainstream, but not going commercial. There's a thin line between commercial and mainstream.
We had an agent in the audience here who wanted to talk to you afterwards, but we'll send him away. Yeah, we'll get rid of him immediately.
You know, let me pipe in on this, and then immediately after this will be my last comment, and we'll go to the audience because it follows so perfectly. But, you know, I want to point out that the transition to what would be a problematic version of the mainstream corporate hip hop was not actually pop, but was gangster, was West Coast gangster. So the lookout isn't for, you know, fluff. The lookout is potentially for something that actually comes organically from the lived experience, but articulates a kind of politics that can be sort of corrosive from the inside out, for maybe good reason, right? But I say that because we're often not looking in that moment. And frankly, you know, if you were in New York in '90 and you listened to West Coast, you think, oh yeah, sure, no way. not even gonna come close. But of course, within 3 to 4 years, it was sort of everywhere, right? And then there's, of course, the role of using the music, the idiom, the lived experience, and the question of audience, which becomes really important globally, right? Because if you have a huge audience well outside of any nation state, which is what most artists have now, then the question becomes, well, what are the consumers of the world? What do they want to see about Egyptian youth, say, for example, right? Because that's, of course, how certain elements of hip hop took hold, not just by African Americans sitting around buying it, right? But by other people saying, oh, this is really what young black men and occasionally women, once in a while, have to say, right? And that's, I think, again, really important. This new technology has all of these possibilities, but that enhances the potential means by which it wouldn't just be the nation state or the state TV station controlling this, but it could be a much more global set of investments that could play a part. Just, really just a way to be a caveat, because my thing is, you learn from history so that you don't repeat it. Not to say it's a fait accompli by any stretch. Okay, we have people, I hope, in the audience who have something to say. This gentleman in the back seems quite ready to speak. How are you?
Riffing on what you just said about neurosis from the inside out, I couldn't help but think about Coca-Cola as an international model, local and global. And there are partisans, some people think Mexican or Moroccan Coca-Cola is better, but it's all Coca-Cola. So I'm questioning the genre of hip-hop. It just as a genre, because it's so stylized, it seems to be imported from America to other places. So I'm asking about hip-hop in the sense that reggae was generated by Jamaica, or that each culture has its call and response. So I'm wondering if hip-hop can come to the place that, say, Trinidad, the steel drum in Trinidad, came about when musical instruments were forbidden by the English. It was its own alternative to banging up the garbage can to make the steel drum. So there was a kind of, as you were saying, a danger, an occupational hazard in the corporate sense of commercial success ruining the cause, right? How to catalyze the anger in a pure form? Do you take hip-hop as a model from America, or do you make your own, like your second musical riff there was more Arabic music inflected. So I'm asking you as an artist, and the beauty and the authenticity of what you're doing is obvious, but I question the model, the American model of hip-hop, how that translates to your world.
I mean, I'm still, affected by American hip hop. The song before was a B.B. King sample.
I was going to ask you that.
This one was a Abdul Halim sample. Abdul Halim's a legend in our music. He's like, the Frank Sinatra, if you want to compare him to that in our world. So we're living in one world. We can't not get affected by the people around us. Algebra is Arabic. It's actually invented by Arab thinkers. It comes from a thinker called Al-Jabarti, and that's how the word algebra comes from. But it doesn't mean that the West can't apply that in art in their daily lives. Same thing for hip hop. Yes, it was created in the West in the early '90s in the Bronx and New York, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn from their struggle and use it with our samples and our culture, our traditions. So everyone has his own version of a certain product, a certain idea, a certain theme. You can't. We have to get affected by each other. We can't not get affected by each other. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did.
In a way.
Yeah.
I actually have a question along those lines about cultural sharing. And I'm curious about whether there's any communication between these political hip-hop artists in different countries in the Arab world. And are you listening to El General, and is that influencing your work? Are you talking to people in Palestine and giving your ideas and sharing expertise? And what kind of sharing goes on in that level between artists? They're doing similar work in different places. In
a way, the sharing comes in the form of a collective. I deal with a lot of Lebanese rappers, Jordanian, Palestinian. All these guys are on my last album, so you can see our collaborations that we do work together in a way to maintain this music. We don't want it to water it down, just like I was saying earlier. So and also this collective was created because no one else supported us. We didn't have record labels to support us. And obviously with the internet, it makes things easier for collaborations to happen, and for people to reach out for you when they hear your music. So, yeah, we're in a way a collective, although each person works under his own umbrella under his own. I don't know if it's a record label. His production, his music, but we work together and we actually discuss certain issues.
So I just showed a film in my class called The Taqwa Course. It's about punk music in North America, punk Muslims basically. And the movement was started because a guy wrote a fictional novel, and he got an email from a 15-year-old in Texas who said, I want to meet these people, I read your book. And he said, they're fictional, they're characters, they're not real. And the kid said, well, I'm going to make it real. And so they started reaching out online and finding throughout North America other Muslim punk kids, and they bought a bus and they did a tour and they crashed a convention, and it started a movement basically. And now there are feature films based on the documentary that's about the novel. So it's talk about life imitating art and vice versa. So, but I think
it's very similar to what you said.
It's an incredible moment that we live in, where communication is possible, and it's really something.
And to add to that, we actually have tours together, like where we choose a certain country. For example, in Egypt last November, we had a very big show, hip hop show, people from Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon. We had a female rapper too, female MC, her name is Malika, check her out. So it was a collective, and for the Egyptian audience to see that, hip hop spoken in different languages, different accents, different samples, but they appreciated it. Recently we just had one in Lebanon. Last week I was in Lebanon with a lot of with the same collective actually, in a way. And we only deal with each other not because we think we're different than the other rappers on the scene. It's because we connect on a musical level. That's very important, to be doing music with people that you understand, people who are with you on the same frequency, on the same level.
And to sort of comment a little bit on your work and what you're talking, that idea of collective. We've talked a lot about Arab hip hop right now and this sort of rupture, right? But I actually see a lot of continuity. When you rap and you talk about Ibn Battuta and other people talk about Mahmoud Darwish and all of these like amazing poets and literary figures and musical genres that are classic and considered very, very much a part of different national cultures, it's a bringing with you. It's a bringing it into the future, into a different era. And when you work collaboratively that way, it crosses countries and you bring more and more into it. And I think it's actually a beautiful sense of continuing a legacy during the middle of rupturing a system, right? Mm-hmm. So it goes more than one way.
Yes.
My question is actually to Professor Muhanna. You talked about the local poetry. Do you think that, especially in the case of the Egyptian Revolution, that it marks the triumph of the vernacular, demotic language versus the standard language? Because yes, we know that the main slogan of the revolution, the people won the war of the regime, wasn't standard, it was Arabic, but the majority of the slogans, maybe Deeb can help me here, were in colloquial, demotic, vernacular Egyptian that began with things like Ya Mubarak, Saudi and Mubarak, Mubarak, Saudi Arabia. So for you, in reference to the Indian president who fled to Saudi Arabia, and then continued with Ya Habib, Mahma Hatta Mush Hasib. Ya Habib was the notorious Minister of Interior Affairs. No matter how hard you hit us, we won't leave. And the play here is on the word Habib, which means a lover, but also means someone who's loved or a lover, and the minister himself. And it's certainly there were revolutions in Egypt before, like the 1881 Arabic Revolution, the 1919 Revolution, and then the 1952 Revolution. And we certainly saw poets, but there were revolutionary poets of the revolution writing in the Sardar Fusha, people like Sami Baruti, for example. But we find in the Egyptian, especially in the Egyptian context, in this specific revolution, that there is a triumph of the vernacular, that the majority of the poetic production of the revolutionary poetic production was in the vernacular, and it was performative, in the double sense of the performative, in that it was performed, but also in the speech act performative, that it did what it said. So do you think that the 21st century is the century of the triumph of the Arabic vernacular, and that the revolution would not have actually have succeeded had it not been for the vernacular.
Jose, this is a very subversive question you've asked me. You do realize that I'm a professor of classical Arabic literature, right? We're going to make that clear? Yes? Okay. I think we're going to see a lot more cultural production in the vernaculars. I think that's a very good thing. I think that it has a legacy. In the Lebanese case, political protest in the 20th century, early 20th century, the language of political protest was often done in zajal, colloquial poetry. So that was the way that you critique the regime. In Morocco in the 70s, also the same thing. The way that you got your message across and the way that everybody could understand it, but still in a kind of veiled way, was in the darija. So I don't know if I want to say that the 21st century is going to witness the triumph of Demotic Arabic over the Fusha, but I think what we're going to see is the two registers beginning to come closer together, and that will mean that we're going to have different linguistic spheres in different places, and who knows? I'm not going to try to predict the future, but for sure there is a whole new range of culture production in Ammiya in a way that was just not conceivable before.
Yes?
I went to Professor Khalek's class, and we watched the movie Technicolor, as she was mentioning, and we sort of saw how some people saw their approach as perhaps heretic. I was wondering if there was a limit to the way that you feel like you can express yourself, or rappers can express themselves through Islam, and would it be personal, or would it be because of societal reasons?
I think it's personal. You know, for me, talking about myself, we started to have explicit lyrics. So you have some very explicit music coming up. I don't know if you heard about Shabi music. Shabi music is, basically streets coming up, music coming up from the streets. Yes, hip hop is the same too, but Shabi is more, if you want to compare it to reggaeton, for example, more dirty, more grimy. There's one song called Heti Bosa Bit, which basically the singer is telling the girl to give him a kiss. I mean, like that's a very you might think it's normal, here, but in my country that's very shocking thing. Yeah, bit, Heti Bosa Bit, so it's very interesting to see that type of music is coming up on the scene too. But yeah, for me, talking about issues like sex and other stuff, that stays with me. That's very personal. I don't like to share that with the people. There's certain things that I choose to keep to myself.
Yeah. I think we can take one more question. Yeah.
First off, I just wanted to thank you for organizing this great discussion. And my question is about a nation, building a new nation. It seems to me that what I take especially out from this discussion is that there should be a rethinking what a nation is. Because it just seems to me that all the revolutions today, they show that after the clash between powers, it just seems to be that a new power coming, it just falls into the same trap as the previous one. And it seems to be the problem is really what the nation is. Is it a homogeneous society that we're trying to build? Or is it, what is a nation? Or is it that we are all different, but not because of what nation, or the nationality that we belong to? It seems to me that, for example, the problem of feminine voices, that after all this happened, they come back and they realize this is not what they wanted. It's just like, maybe because a nation, this model of patriarchal still model, it just doesn't include them into this, our traditional vision of what a nation is.
Yeah.
I personally think that that division and differences of opinion and even radical difference in society is a very healthy thing. I like to see that when people complain about the dirty, the difficult, messy aftermath of these revolutions, to me that's when it's becoming interesting and becoming real.
You know, it's like now we're talking about stuff. Now, I mean, this is something that's like a pet peeve of mine when people say, oh, the Lebanese, for example, the Lebanese are so divided, they're not a country, and look at these other countries that have stood up and they're real nations. And no, that's not, I mean, the fact that people are saying we are, I don't agree with this person and I'm different, but we're not going to kill each other over it. We're going to discuss things. I think that every society in the Middle East is like this already. It's just that we're only, they're only airing their dirty laundry after the revolution. Whereas now we've had our revolution, we can put all our dirty laundry out and we can talk about it and fight about it with each other for a little bit, and then come to terms with each other about it. I mean, otherwise it's artificial, I think.
Adi, did you have a comment, question?
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Coming back to the Shabi, I was thinking, for example, what happened and what's still happening in Algeria, in my country. And as you know, for example, a certain number of singers, not only the one that would sing hip-hop style, but the Shabi on the one hand, and also the Rai, has been a real problem in Algeria. And as you know, a number of singers and poets have been killed. And a lot of them are still in danger. And it implies, I mean, obviously political aspect and also gender. Because I think for some people, for some women to sing Rai with the lyrics, which are, of course, political on the one hand, but also raise a certain number of questions about the status of women, of their ability to sing, of course, but also social status. So my question is, what is really the level of tolerance or acceptation of this, kind of music and lyrics, of course. Because I think it just, for example, in Nigeria, I think it's linked to the political fights. In a way, there are things that you can't say or do politically, and you can sing them at the same time. Or if you do it, you would have to use
certain words.
Number.
That's what we used to do. That's what we used to do before the revolution. Like I can never say the word government. I would always like use a certain word to replace it. But everyone knew what I was talking about. Well, I don't know about the certain barriers that you should have for music. I mean, music should be free to everyone. But for example, with Shabi music, because it's so explicit, because it's very similar to the whole, to the dirty side of reggaeton. I don't have nothing against reggaeton, by the way. I'm not a listener of that. I don't like that type of music. If you guys appreciate it, that's up to you. Well, I don't, where I'm from, like, there's certain issues that I need to listen to in a song, rather than a song talking about, shaking someone's ass, or, for me, I don't relate to that, I want something that I would feel, something that I will vibe to, think about. So as long as the music is, it addresses certain real issues. It talks about identity, talks about history, it's informative, because in my country there's a lot of illiteracy rates. I'll go back to this point. So the music that comes out has to be informative, has to help out those listeners who don't read books. That's my point.
And if I may sort of continue on that idea of nation and what it will be, I think that we can drill that down even further, and I think what people are continuing to do is, yes, trying to figure out what they're going to be as a nation, but questioning citizenship. What constitutes me as a citizen? What are my rights? What should I be allowed to do? How do we need to collaborate with each other? And I think you kind of have to start there with questioning the idea, what makes me a citizen? What makes us co-citizens? Before you can then, from that, start to sort of organically build your idea of a nation as a whole, right? Because it comes down to the citizen at the end of the day. And to continue a little bit about, with regards to Deeb's work and who it's addressed to and questions of audiences, I think that those questions of audiences and those tensions are, something that are really pervasive and common in societies that are sort of post-dictatorial or post-colonial, because we have issues of literacy, you have issues of linguistic changes, you have class issues that are so beyond pronounced, right? And so there's always that tension to be a great, writer or something in a place that has a very high rate of illiteracy, well, who is your audience? Are you a writer of your people if they can't read you? Are you a poet or a griot in a sense of your people if they don't understand the linguistic register that you're using? So that tension of audience is something that is, really unique and really salient to certain parts of the world in a way that here it's really difficult to sort of register.
Yeah. Well, I know we're over time, and I want to make sure you get a chance to go see Out on East potentially, but I want to thank everyone for a wonderful conversation, and especially Deeb for coming such a long way to share his work and to be our special guest. Thank you. Thanks again, everyone.